Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Sparkling Knowledge Channel. Shemwaeel Taloot and Dawood alayhis salam, prophets, armies and kings. There was a place in times of old where a large group of Israelites found themselves suddenly and violently homeless. A powerful enemy of theirs had invaded their land, driven them from their homes, and enslaved many of their loved ones. Fortunately, they were not alone. God had sent them the prophet Shemwaeel to guide them and help them in their time of need. The elders of the disposed Israelites gathered and argued over what their next step should be. The debate raged on for a very long time, so they finally decided they needed someone who would have the final say in their plans and who would make the hard decisions for everyone. Someone who would lead them into battle and help them take back their homes from the invaders. In short, they needed a king. Once this decision was reached, more arguments broke out as to who this king should be. Eventually, the angry group went and asked Shemwaeel to choose a king from amongst them. Shemwaeel studied their faces and challenged them about their determination to fight the enemy. He asked them frankly whether they would stand their ground if God told them to fight, or if they would disobey and abandon the field of battle. The elders replied indignantly that they would indeed stand their ground. After all, they had been driven from their homes and had lost both friends and families to the enemy. Seeing their determination, though not overly assured by their motives, Shemwaeel agreed to pray and consult God on the matter. When Shemwaeel received his answer from God, he knew his people would not be pleased. Nevertheless, he stood before them and announced that God had indeed decreed that they fight their enemy, and that Talut was the king God had chosen for them because of his wisdom and strength. Both of these traits, he explained, would serve Talut as the new king well in the days to come. Shemwaeel barely finished speaking before a great hubbub broke out and many voices were raised in strident objection. Quite a few people simply left because they were unwilling to fight an enemy they saw as impossibly powerful. The people who stayed were willing to fight, but they argued about God's choice of a king for them. Talut, the people said, was not of any royal bloodline, he was not a wealthy man of means, and he was not from any of the prominent Israelite families. How could he be their king? Everyone insisted that Shemwaeel bring them proof that God had chosen this humble man to be their king. Shemwaeel readily replied that God would prove his choice of Talut as the new king by returning to the people the lost coffin that contained artifacts from Musa and Harun. Furthermore, this coffin would be fetched and carried back to the people by angels. Silence fell after this second announcement. How could anyone argue with such a thing? Soon enough, the coffin was indeed miraculously returned, and the people all quietly accepted Talut as their new, undisputed king. Talut knew that he would have to prepare his people for a great and difficult battle, so he lost no time in recruiting all the able-bodied men and marching away to train and test them. Training the men went well, and Talut was much heartened by his men's skill. Testing the men, however, did not proceed so well. After a long and arduous march, Talut told his men that they would soon come across a river and that God wished to test their faith using this river. Despite their thirst and exhaustion, they were forbidden from drinking any of the river's water. Anyone who drank the river's forbidden water would have failed the test of faith and would not be marching any further with him. Anyone who didn't drink the river's water or drank only a single handful would pass the test of faith and would march forward to engage the enemy. After a long and arduous march, Talut told his men that they would soon come across a river, that God wished to test their faith using this river. Despite their thirst and exhaustion, they were forbidden from drinking any of the river's water. Anyone who drank the river's forbidden water would have failed the test of faith and would not be marching any further with him. Anyone who didn't drink the river's water or drank only a single handful would pass the test of faith and would march forward to engage the enemy. Much to Talut's disappointment, the majority of his men drank greedily from the river, failing the test of faith without a thought. The small number of men who showed restraint and passed the test of their faith accompanied Talut across the river and stood looking at their depleted number in dismay. Many of the men loudly declared that they could never beat their enemy. Jaloot and his men, with so few soldiers, a small number of the men contradicted their comrades by bravely declaring that many a small army had defeated a great army by the will of God, and that God always stood with the patient. After a moment of quiet contemplation, the small faithful army marched onward, led their determined king Talut. When the two armies met on the field of battle, Talut and his men prayed that God would give them patience, help them stand their ground, and give them victory over Jaloot and his soldiers. Then the battle began, and all the men proved their stalwart faith to be a march of Jaloot's numerous soldiers. Victory, however, was not so easily attained that day. Jaloot, the leader of the enemy army, was a man of great physical strength and soldierly prowess. He easily defeated anyone and everyone who was brave enough to challenge him, and demoralized his enemy with his seeming invincibility. Talut saw the effect Jalut's might was having on his people, and he quickly realized that the key to defeating the enemy was to defeat their fearsome leader. So he called for a volunteer from amongst his bravest men to go forward and bring down the mountainous leader of the enemy army. Daoud, a young soldier of considerable skill and bravery, volunteered to go forward and face Jalut. Both Talut and Daoud prayed for victory as Daoud bravely challenged and faced the mighty Jalut. Against all odds, Daoud fought and killed Jalut, thus destroying the indestructible and bringing hope back to his comrades' flagging spirits. With renewed determination, the small army pushed forward and quickly destroyed the large army. Thanks to their patience and faith, on that day Talut and his men were granted the unlikely victory they had hoped and prayed for.